Well, hey, welcome back. I'm Chris. I'm the pastor at Compass. And as always, I'm thrilled that you're with me, especially since over the last 2 weeks, we've been online only because there was a spike of COVID in our community. And honestly, while I love in-person services, I love live worship. I love interacting with people in the flesh. I have to confess that I also love being part of the online service. Hanging out with you while I'm in my own home, on my comfy couch, in my comfy pajamas, drinking delicious coffee out of my own comfy mug. It's just so convenient. No shower required. I don't even have to brush my teeth, and I can still chat with all of you on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're watching this. The sheer convenience of online Compass is pretty great, which makes a lot of sense because everything in our lives has kind of become oriented around being convenient. I can order anything I want and have it delivered by Amazon in 2 days. I can get same-day grocery delivery from Walmart. I can stream the Matrix Resolutions or Encanto in my living room where I know that the volume will be perfect. I can eat whatever I want. I can control the temperature. I can hit pause and go to the bathroom. And all of that instead of having to go to a movie theater where someone is going to whip out their cell phone and blind me. We are figuring out more and more how to make life convenient for ourselves. But there's one thing that we haven't figured out how to make convenient yet, and that's people. No matter how hard we try, people are still just really inconvenient. They talk to us when we don't want to talk. They drive too slow, or they drive too fast. They don't wear masks when they're supposed to, or they wear masks when they don't have to. They make us watch videos on their cracked phone screens. They eat with their mouths open. They don't put the toilet seat down. They ask us annoying questions, and they complain all the time. And honestly, that's just our kids. In a world full of coworkers, fellow students, teachers, bosses, teammates, neighbors, acquaintances, people can just be inconvenient. And I don't know about you, but the temptation for me when someone is annoying or irritating or time-consuming or even boring, just very inconvenient in any way, the temptation for me is to find ways to kind of cut them out of my life, to push them to the outside, because I don't want to deal with inconvenient people all the time. Now, look, I know that that's just me. I know that you have no problem with irritating people, but even so, I want to look at a time when Jesus had a long day, when he was tired, and he had to deal with some inconvenient people. So let's start in Matthew 8:16. It says, that evening, many demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. He cast out the evil spirits with a simple command, and he healed all the sick. So right out of the gate, one could assume, I'm just presuming this, but I think you're with me. One could assume that demon-possessed people would be fairly inconvenient, probably not terribly well behaved. I would guess that they're pretty non-compliant and difficult to work with. And even if their heads don't spin around 360 degrees, and even if they don't puke pea green soup all over the place, they are probably not fun people to be around. Now, I know I joke, but imagine hundreds of sick, diseased, demon-possessed, and probably deeply mentally ill people showing up at your house for help. Because that's what happened to Jesus. And there's an interesting reason that they all came in the evening that we can find when we look at the parallel version of this story in the Gospel of Mark. And so this is just what Mark 1 says, beginning the same story, Mark 21. It says that Jesus and his companions went to the town of Capernaum. When the Sabbath day came, he went into the synagogue and began to teach. After Jesus left the synagogue with James and John, they went to Simon and Andrew's home. Last week, we talked about what happened when he was at Simon and Andrew's home. He healed Simon Peter's mother-in-law. And all of these things happened on the Sabbath, which is the day that Jewish people were commanded to set aside as holy to God. And so what that means is that on the Sabbath, people were prohibited from working. That included traveling outside of your city or town. It included carrying any item, no matter how small or for whatever purpose, outside of your home. If someone was sick or injured, you were allowed to stabilize them if their life was in danger, but you weren't allowed to heal them or do any work beyond that. So like if you had COVID, I could stabilize you and I could make sure it wasn't life-threatening. But any treatment beyond that would violate the Sabbath law. See, the reason everyone came to Jesus in the evening was because it was the Sabbath, and the Sabbath ended as soon as you could see 2 stars in the sky. So the evening of the Sabbath is over. And as the sun began to set and as the Sabbath ended, people could now do the work of carrying their sick friends and relatives to Jesus, and even perhaps traveling outside of their own town or village to where he was. Another thing that is really important to see here is that because it was the Sabbath, Jesus had spent the whole day teaching in the local synagogue. He'd been working all day. And that was work that the Sabbath laws allowed, but there's no way he wasn't tired and ready to call it a day. I mean, at the end of the day, here hundreds of people show up and are asking Jesus for things. If you're a parent or if you've had to care for a child in any way, you know exactly what this is like. You are home from work, you're worn out, you just want some peace and quiet, and you hear this little voice yelling from the bathroom, "I need someone to help me wipe my bottom." And I know that's just one example from maybe my life, but honestly, the examples of how children are inconvenient are endless, because people are inconvenient and children are little people. And even though the people who swarmed Jesus at the end of his long day genuinely needed help, they were inconvenient. But in spite of that, Jesus went out and he did the work of healing people and setting them free. I mean, the people, they probably to him felt rude and demanding for how they came to him. And I'm sure it would be an inconvenience if a bunch of people camped out on your front porch until you gave them what they wanted. But he saw the people in need and he helped them. And the reason is because Jesus lived an inconvenient life for the good of others. We've seen it over and over again in this Outsiders Message series, times when Jesus was confronted by inconvenient people who didn't fully fit into the culture for one reason or another, who were asking him for things all the time. And he always responded in a way that was for their good, regardless of who they were or what they wanted or how they came to him. Jesus lived an inconvenient life for the good of other people. And here I want to show you why. So let's look at Matthew 8:16 through 17 now. It says this. It says that evening, many demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. He cast out the evil spirits with a simple command, and he healed all the sick. And get this, this fulfilled the word of the Lord through the prophet Isaiah, who said, "He took our sicknesses and removed our diseases." At the end of this passage, Matthew includes an observation. It's a connection that he made between Jesus and something that was written down in the book of the prophet Isaiah more than 500 years earlier. And this is how it's worded in Isaiah 53:4. Yet it was our weakness he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. So this passage, this verse in Isaiah can be translated as well the way that Matthew did. He took our sicknesses and he removed our diseases. See, Matthew, living with Jesus, seeing Jesus, believed what Christians for centuries have believed. That when this was written in around 500 BC, it was a prophecy inspired by God that would ultimately be fulfilled by the life of Jesus. I mean, we know Jesus lived an inconvenient life for the good of others, but there's so much more. Matthew led us to Isaiah 53. So let's take a bigger look at what it has to say about Jesus. And again, Isaiah 53:4 starts this way. It says, "Yet it was our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion. He was crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so that we could be healed. All of us like sheep have strayed away. We've left God's paths to follow our own, yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all." Now, if you read this, believing that it was a description of the life of Jesus that was written 100 or 200 years after his death, it would still perfectly have described his life. But this was written 500 years before his birth. And somehow it not only describes a picture of his life, but it lays out the purpose of his life, which was to carry the sins of us all. See, everything Jesus suffered, from the smallest inconvenience to the most brutal abuse, was for one purpose: to deal with the weight of our sin and create a way for us to have a right and real relationship with God. Continues in verse 11. When he sees all that is accomplished by his anguish, he will be satisfied. And because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous, for he will bear all their sins. Because of Jesus' experience, his suffering, and his death, he made it possible for us to be counted as righteous in spite of the fact that we aren't righteous. He made it possible for us to be considered completely without sin, even though we are incapable of not sinning. In short, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection release us from the burden of guilt, shame, and brokenness caused by sin. We can be free. And we didn't do anything to accomplish that freedom or to deserve it. It was a gift he knew every part of his life was going to point to, from his suffering and death even to the inconvenient life he lived for the good of other people. But there's one other important thing I want to make sure you see about Jesus from Isaiah 53:11. It says, when he sees all that is accomplished by his anguish, he will be satisfied. See, Jesus didn't put up with inconvenient people, suffer torture, and die on a cross, and then just go, man, I wish I hadn't done that. That was not worth it. No. Instead, when he looks at everything that was accomplished by his anguish, our freedom from sin, our invitation to an acceptance into relationship with God, our inclusion into an unconditional community that has Jesus at the center in the church, he looks at all of that and he's like, that was totally worth it. I mean, look at how Hebrews 12:2 puts it. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. And now he's seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. Think of all the hostility that he endured from sinful people, and then you won't become weary and give up. See, it was a joy for Jesus to suffer for irritating, disobedient, non-compliant, annoying, demanding, and inconvenient people like you and like me. Because even though we are all of those things, we are so much more. We are God's children. We are people he loves and cherishes, not because we earn it somehow, but because we are his. And because he loves us like that, we are worthy of his love in spite of how it inconveniences him. And it's because of that love that we now have the responsibility to go into our world and live it out ourselves. See, Jesus lived an inconvenient life for the good of others, and now so should we. At a time when he would have been expected to kick his feet up and rest, Jesus was surrounded by the insistent demands of human need. And without complaint, he selflessly met all of those needs. And this small picture of healing people when it was inconvenient on a night in Capernaum, it expands into the big picture life of Jesus, who, because of the joy of what it would accomplish, selflessly gave everything for an insistently demanding world of people. A Jesus whose compassion for each of us is so great that he was willing to suffer whatever was thrown at him so that we could know God and be free of the weight of guilt and shame and sin. Now, as we wrap up, I'd just like you to ask yourself a couple of questions. First, who are the inconvenient people in my life? I mean, who gets on your nerves? Who's that annoying person who always comes to you, but you hide when you see them coming? Who are the people it takes work to be around? Whether it's just emotional effort or energy, or simply putting up with the significant differences you have with this person. So who is that person in your life? And then second, ask yourself this: how can I be inconvenienced for their good? Maybe it's being willing to sacrifice 20 minutes of productive time from your day just to talk to them. Maybe it's helping them move or visiting them when they're sick. Maybe it's wearing a mask because it makes them comfortable, or letting them rant to you about politics. I mean, it could be a whole lot of different things. But at the end of the day, It's simply this. It's just being available to them when they need help, especially when it's inconvenient. That's what Jesus did. And that's what we should do too. His love for us spanned the gamut of being asked for help at the end of a long day, all the way to being asked to lay down his life so we could be free. And there's a lot of love in the space between those two things. So together, let's explore and discover what it looks like to be inconvenienced for others. Like Jesus did, I'm willing to bet that we will also discover the same joy and satisfaction in doing it that he did. So let's get to it. Let's be inconvenienced for the good of others. Let's love our neighbor as ourselves. Let's live like Jesus lived, think like Jesus thought, and do what he taught. I'll see you soon.